Blacks in Technology.
Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology.
Welcome, everyone, to the Blacks in Technology BITTechTalk podcast. I'm your host, Gray Greenlee, the founder of the Blacks in Technology organization. And this is a podcast where we talk to Black women and men who are engineers, innovators, educators, inventors, change makers, and entrepreneurs doing amazing things in the world of technology. This podcast is where they share their stories, experiences, ideas, knowledge, and perspective on tech with the BIT community. If this is your first time listening, you can find us at the following URLs. We're on blacksintechnology.net. We're also on Twitter, and that's BLKINTECHNOLOGY. Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, all under Blacks in Technology. Blacks in Technology is a tech-focused community and media organization that is dedicated to increasing the representation and participation of Black women and men in the technology industry. And we're always looking to form new partnerships and opportunities to assist our members with their continued professional growth and development. So if you want to partner with us or you want to sponsor one of these podcasts, send us an email to contact us at blacksintechnology.net. All right. Our guest today is going to be Abadesi Osunsade. She is the founder of Hustle Crew, which is an organization that gives talks, training, and mentorship to make tech more inclusive. She is also the co-host of Techish, the Techish podcast, I should say. And the podcast is about the intersection of tech, pop culture, and life. It's voted one of the top 20 tech podcasts on Apple Podcasts. And she's also the author of Dream Big, Hustle Hard, the Millennial Woman's Guide to Success in Tech. And so I want to welcome Abadesi to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Really happy to be here.
Excellent. Same here. I really appreciate you. And you're coming, or I'm sorry, you're based out of London, correct?
Yeah, I am. I live in London now, but I'm from DC originally. That's where I was born.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And, what's funny is like when you first got on the call here, I was like, I can detect a very slight British accent, but it's not like a full British accent. So
yeah.
I was like, wow, that's...
I've been in the UK, I guess, half my life. Yeah, because I'm in my 30s now, and I moved here when I was like 13, 14. I used to sound very, very American. And then I went to boarding school where there weren't really any American people, and everyone made fun of how I spoke. So over time, you just kind of tend to adapt to fit in.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us, where you're from, a little bit about your education and background.
Yes, I'd love to. So as you said, my name's Abadesi Osunsade, and some folks might recognize that as a Yoruba name, Yoruba being a tribe in Nigeria. So my dad's from Nigeria and my mom is from the Philippines. They moved to DC before I was born. So that's how I was born in DC. And I spent the early part of my life just like any typical American kid in the suburbs. So, we lived in the suburbs of DC, Silver Spring, Maryland. My life was very typical until I was 8 years old and my dad was promoted at his job at the International Monetary Fund to be a country director in Africa. So I suddenly found myself age 8 living in Tanzania. I lived there for a few years, going to the American school there. Then I went to Kenya for a few years, Nigeria for a few years, and then finally boarding school in the UK. And I finished my education in the UK and I decided to go to university here. I wanted to follow my dad's footsteps. He was an economist. So I was like, I want to study economics. I got into London School of Economics, graduated there. And then I graduated in the last recession. We're recording this podcast in the current recession, but I graduated in the last one. And, if anyone can remember that kind of period of time, 2009, I just wanted any job. At that point, I was like, I'm not going to be picky. If someone can help me pay my bills and my student loan debt, I will take that job. So I found my very first job working for a financial publishing company, helping run conferences for bankers and CFOs all around the world. And after about 18 months of that, I just thought, well, you know what, maybe I want something more than money. Maybe I also want to be fulfilled, do something exciting. And I was really inspired by the Social Network movie to move into tech. I was just like, this movie's great. I
Nice.
want to be a billionaire. I want to build exciting products with my friends. And that's how I found my first tech job. So that's like almost 10 years ago now. I got a job at Groupon here in London. The company was growing so fast. This was about a year before IPO. I remember I joined as the 10th member of a new account management / operations team. And over the next 8 months, our department went from 10 to like 55, 60, which was mad. Absolute madness. And yeah, after 3 years at Groupon, I was headhunted into Amazon to be a key account manager on the payments team there. Worked in London, Slough, which is where Amazon's headquarters used to be. Not very glamorous place in the UK, but you know, Amazon is frugal, so they had their HQ there. Even got to spend some time in Seattle, which is really cool. And then I got headhunted to work at Hotel Tonight, which has been acquired by Airbnb. I helped launch the app in Dublin and Edinburgh and Manchester. It was quite a commercial role, like another growth role, partnerships oriented role. And then, 4 years ago, I had quit Hotel Tonight to start my first company, and that's Hustle Crew. And the idea behind Hustle Crew was initially to create a community, just like what you have done with Blacks in Technology, to create a community of other people who, like me, had done the startup game, had worked in the tech game, and realized that it's not a level playing field at all. I had personal experiences of feeling excluded, of not being believed, not getting the same respect or attention as my white male peers. And I just thought, how many other people have experienced this? And unfortunately, there were many. And that's when I thought there's a real business to be made here, because you know, if you think of the timing of that was 2016. So in the previous year, you know, Black Lives Matter had really grown so much in volume in terms of how many people are participating in the conversation online. And it was really like the first time in my life that I could connect with my Black identity, connect with my identity in terms of how it impacted me in the workplace. And it was almost like the first time where I really kind of accepted that racism is very much well and alive, sexism is very much well and alive, and actively playing a role in how my career was playing out. And I wanted to do something about it. So now Hustle Crew works with companies that want to understand racism, sexism, bias, discrimination better, and companies that want to understand structural oppression better. You know, companies still don't understand why there's a disproportionate amount of white people in the top universities of our world, right? So, you know, I go into these organizations to teach them about systems of oppression, so that as they go about designing everything from a recruitment process to an actual product, they can take all of this into consideration and make sure that all the work they're doing will attract a diverse audience, and it will also make sense to a diverse audience. So yeah, that's me.
Nice. Very nice. And I'm going to go back a little bit to ask you a couple of questions that popped in my mind. So early on in your life, it seems like you did a lot of traveling because you were living in different areas. You mentioned Nigeria, Kenya.
Yes.
And then, of course, London. And you come from DC, which DC, I've been there a few times. It's from what I could see, was relatively more diverse than some areas of the United States.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm guessing that's because of everything involving the government being there,
embassies,
so,
international schools, absolutely, yeah.
Exactly. So I wondered, kind of how you traveling and living in these different areas, kind of how that shaped your perspective. What's it good? How did that shape your perspective on when you got into how did that help you in the tech industry? Like, did that, because obviously you're seeing more people that kind of look like you when you spent your time and then you come into somewhere like London and you go into the tech scene, and then it's a stark contrast from what you've experienced in kind of in your past. Like how did that affect that?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I feel really grateful for the fact that I had so much exposure to different cultures and different ethnicities and different
Right.
languages as I was growing up. And also that just in the process of moving country all the time, I had to learn how to adapt very quickly
Hmm.
and get comfortable in a new setting very quickly. And I think a lot of those skills come back to this idea of resilience and how capable someone is of, bouncing back or dealing with setbacks, dealing with adversity. So I think in some ways, just in terms of a skill set, I'm really fortunate that those experiences could prepare me for the skills that one needs to navigate the tech industry, because the tech industry is full of ups and downs, full of roller coasters. You join a startup, it runs out of funding the next quarter, you don't know what to do with yourself. So, or your product's going one way, as soon as you release it, none of the users like the features you've made, so you got to go the other direction. So, there's a lot of disappointment when you work in technology. You kind of had to get used to disappointment. You have to get used to your expectations not being met by reality. So I'm grateful that those experiences could help me do that. But then at the same time, like, sometimes I think about my very, very, very first tech job. And my very, very first tech job is not a typical first tech job. Most people don't find themselves in their early 20s at what Forbes describes as one of the fastest growing companies ever. Like, very few people find
Right.
themselves at a unicorn company a year before the IPO. And what happened in my very first tech job at this unicorn company, the fastest growing company in the world, because we were growing so quickly in one of Europe's largest capital cities, 10 plus million people, high immigrant population. My very first tech job was a job where there were all sorts of people joining the company every day. I'm talking like diversity of age, diversity of hair color, like shapes and size, political opinion. And I suddenly, because that was my first experience of tech, I just made this assumption that tech is a diverse industry, right? Because I'd been working in
Mm.
finance before, which was very, pale, male, and stale, as we say here in the UK. And I suddenly found myself in this vibrant office. And, I always feel at home in multicultural
Right.
places. That I grew up in a multicultural house. My father was Black, my mother was Asian. You go to
Yeah.
church, everyone's coming from different countries. You go visit family, friends, everyone's speaking multiple languages. I always feel at home in those environments, because when everyone is an outsider, no one is an outsider. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, it's in those
Yeah.
environments where I never felt left out. And so in a similar way, coming into Groupon, which was really just a bunch of misfits, and I've always identified with the misfits, I felt so at home. And then it was only when I left Groupon, when Amazon headhunted me and, they gave me a great offer, I was like, woohoo, let's go to Amazon. I get a staff discount as well. I was like, I can share this with my family and friends, staff discount, let's go. But anyway, it was only when I then got to Amazon, I was like, wow, okay, so Groupon was actually quite an anomalous company in terms of its
Right.
diversity of class, socioeconomic background, because now I'm in Amazon and it's very, very much what I expected of the corporate world in the West, which is pretty white,
Yeah.
pretty male dominated. So yeah, it's interesting the way it's played out. In some ways, this diverse international background has been really, really beneficial, but at the same time, it's also created this expectation and ideal in me, where an ideal situation is I'm always in that multicultural, diverse environment. And unfortunately, tech does not offer very many of those.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's interesting to hear about that story. When I was young, around the age of 12, I moved from a majority Black community to a majority white community, and um, it was a bit of a harrowing experience
I can
for
imagine.
me. But at the same time, it gave me kind of more of an insight into, I guess, the inner workings of quote unquote, like white society, right?
Mm,
And then, of course, there's, what you spoke of, which is having to adapt to the environment that you're in, and things of that nature. And then, now that I'm older and I'm married, my wife is biracial, and so my kids grow up in this very, very diverse family where
mm,
my their grandparents are white, and then they have cousins that are Asian and white, and then of course they
mm.
have cousins that are Black, and so they get to experience this. And I love what you say about being in this kind of multicultural um, atmosphere or environment, how it makes you feel comfortable. And I think that's because that's the way it's supposed to be, right? Like,
Totally.
because I when I look at my sons, um, there was a time where there was at their school, they both go to a Montessori school, but of course, even Montessoris, they're not, as far as the education, they're not, I guess, they still have to teach the school curriculum.
Got it. Okay, yeah.
And even though they're a Montessori and they have some higher academic standards and things like that, they're not filtered away from having to teach things or like slavery and things like that. So there was an issue that we had to address, the teachers and the principal there, about the way that they taught about enslaved people.
Wow.
And it was a thing where it's just like you all are right now, you are tampering with their confidence of themselves and who they are, because they're not aware of that. They're not aware of this era where people were being demeaned and dehumanized and things like that. And for you to present it in this way, and they come from this multicultural family, they don't know that that's how things they don't think in that manner. They think that this is how things are supposed to be. And so it's when you're from that and you go into another environment, it can be a shock to some people, and sometimes it's hard to adjust for others. And that's why organizations like Hustle Crew, organizations like Blacks in Technology, and there are a bunch of others out there now, why these are needed, because there still needs to be a space for us to grow and learn and support one another.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to talk a little bit about Hustle Crew, and I know you mentioned why you started it, but what was that moment? Because you go from corporate America and one of the largest companies in the world to kind of start this, right? So what was that? I know everyone has a moment where they're just like, oh, this isn't the way things should be, and I need to do something to help that. So,
yeah, I think for me it was. It's funny because it's something that I've only really become comfortable accepting and speaking openly about probably in the last year or so. At the beginning, when people would say, why at that time, why this, why that, I would always say like, oh, like I was just so unhappy in how I had been treated in my last job. I really wanted to do something about it. But the reality is, I, like many Black and brown founders, I don't have the benefit that some of my peers do. I don't have a friends and family round that helped me launch my business. For me, starting a company was literally making the sacrifice of, okay, I have a limited amount of funds available to me. I can either keep them in my savings, or I can take a risk on this idea and see if I can make it happen. And, I decided to take a risk. And the reason I had to take that risk was because, having left Hotel Tonight, I was trying to apply for other jobs. And because of how things had ended when I left the company, I had basically become this pariah that no one wanted to give any references to. So I got a job offer, and no one would give me references. And, the startup world is so small, so tiny, that if someone smells a bad apple, they're not going to hire you. And I remember speaking to one of the hiring managers I got on so well with, and she was like, we're making an offer. It was in the process of vetting that she said, oh, I'm sorry, we can't make this offer to you. And I had assumed it was because, their attempts to contact people I used to work with hadn't worked out. And I remember WhatsApping some of the women that I used to sit with and be like, hey, would you be willing to give me a reference? Would you be willing to give me a reference? Till today, they've never replied. And I think this experience that I have, it's a type of gaslighting, and so many people from the Black community and other underrepresented communities will have experienced it. You're working somewhere, certain words are said to you, certain behavior is done that makes it difficult for
Yeah.
you to do your job, because you're suddenly taken out of what you were hired to do, and you're participating in identity politics. You know, you're having to explain to people why it's not okay to touch your hair, or why it's not okay to talk about XYZ. And that's basically what happened in that environment. And, you know, I made my complaints to the relevant people, and in the end I decided to leave. I was just like, this isn't really going anywhere, so I'm going to leave the company. And when I left the company, a lot of the people still didn't really agree with the things that I had raised as issues, the things that I had called up as blocking my productivity and blocking my ability to feel secure and safe in my workplace. A lot of people didn't agree that those were valid concerns. And that's kind of what got me to this point. I was so infuriated at the point where all these people I had worked alongside with for a year, you know, to the tune of raising like almost $500,000 in revenue single-handedly myself through the clients that I had brought on. I was like, damn, that's how you treat people. Like, we were all friends when I was working hard, when I was putting in the hours, working on the weekends. Y'all were my friends. But now that I have an issue that makes you feel uncomfortable, no one is around. And that's when I just thought, do you know what? If I am experiencing this with all the credentials I have on my CV and all of the connections I have in my network, what is it like for that person who looks just like me but isn't as connected or isn't as accomplished? Yeah. She's going through something even worse. And I just couldn't live with myself if I didn't do something about it. And I was just like, well, I'm not going to get a job anyway, since no one wants to give me a reference. So let me just go and do Hustle Crew. And the ironic thing is, like, I see those people from time to time, you know, like on the internet, the people that wouldn't help me. And it's just so funny because now I have to be grateful to them, because if it weren't for their cold dismissal of me, I never would have started my company. And look at me now, you know, like I still have a long way to go. I'm at the beginning of my journey, but I have helped thousands of young people from underrepresented backgrounds gain the confidence to think of getting into tech, to take the risk of applying to tech. I've mentored hundreds of women single-handedly. And I just think if I hadn't had that horrible experience myself, I never would have found the courage and conviction to go on this journey. So, you know, there was a time when I really just did not like those people. But over the last few months, I've been reflecting, and I was like, I'm actually quite grateful for that, for that hating that I got back then.
Right. It's interesting what you said about how infuriating it was that these people, you know, kind of wouldn't go to bat for you. It's kind of how I felt with, you know, talking, you know, some of, I would say some of my former white friends, where, you know, you would, for instance, you know, I would bring up, we would talk about, you know, maybe politics or maybe, you know, things that were going on in society. And I would bring up a time like, hey, I was 19 and I got harassed by the cops for, you know, and I would tell them the incident. And then the first thing that they would say was, well, what did you do?
Oh, yes. Wow.
And I would be like,
wow,
dude, I can't even get the benefit of the doubt in this case.
Wow.
That's infuriating. And even now, and what we're dealing with here in the era of Trump, right?
Yeah.
I've lost people who I thought were friends, and it's infuriating to see now that, you know, they kind of question you now. It's just like, you know, they question racism. They question that as if to say, I'm making it up. And it's like, I've known you for umpteen years and I don't get the benefit of the doubt that this is actually my experience in life. And for you to question it, that's infuriating. I thought you were a better person than that. So,
honestly, the role that racism plays in our society is crazy, because the people that are often creating that racism are so oblivious to it, or in denial of the fact that they're doing it. I mean, I remember mentioning to someone that I was going to quit because I was so unhappy. This is one of my colleagues. I was working in the Berlin office, and her response was something like, "What? So you can go on unemployment benefits?" And I was just like,
"Oh,
wow." I was like, where do you even begin to unpack that as a response. Like I was confiding in how unhappy I was in the London office, all of these incidents of like sexism that I just didn't like, blah, 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 blah. I just can't take it anymore. I'm going to leave. And the first thing out of her mouth, not like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to hear this. Oh my gosh, like what can I do to support you? Oh, this sounds horrible, blah,
Yeah,
blah,
it's
blah.
just some
Was,
empathy.
oh, so you can sign up and get paid by the government. And I was just like, damn, these stereotypes, this hatred, this white supremacy, it's everywhere, but we don't mention the words. And a big part of Hustle Crew is for us to get comfortable mentioning the words. White supremacy. You know, I am living in a country that made its riches off an empire and slavery that my ancestors were a part of. Now people don't want to tell me that, they want to tell me they don't see race. They want to tell me they don't see these things. And I was just like, that is problematic. And I'm here to tell you why. So, you know, the work that we do at Hustle Crew is not easy. You know, I always say this. People often say to me like, oh, you know, what's the bravest thing you've done recently? And I say to them, I was like, every time I go into a room full of highly educated, highly intelligent white men in the tech industry, CEOs and CTOs, and start deconstructing structural oppression for them, and deconstructing white supremacy and educating them on why there's an assumption that white people are better than blacks and browns and everyone else, and why there's this assumption that men have certain leadership qualities that women don't. That is my bravest moment, because it's not easy. You know, you walk into a room and you're basically telling people that all of the stories they have believed all their lives are based on lies.
Yeah, that mirror is is a hard thing for some people to face themselves in that mirror.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So a little bit more about Hustle Crew. How many people are part of your team?
So at the moment, I have 2 other folks who've helped with facilitation. I have someone working on copy and marketing, someone working on operations, and then someone working on socials. So we're a team of 5 plus me, 6.
Gotcha. And tell us a little bit about your training approach. Like what's the what are the steps? You know, let's start from the beginning of a company reaching out to you.
Yeah. So companies usually reach out to us with like 2 specific objectives on the training front. Either they've identified that underrepresented individuals are more likely to stay when their companies invest in their personal development and invest in their growth and well-being. And we offer a number of career skills workshops, some targeted specifically for women, underrepresented women, and some which are more general. But a lot of employers might be like, you know, our team want to work on building their confidence or understanding imposter syndrome better, and we'll come in and deliver a workshop on that. So many different career skills workshops, particularly for junior and mid-level professionals. We'll come in and do them, and we'll bring in that expertise of folks who they can relate to, folks who've been in the trenches of the startup world just like them. So that's why companies might come to us, or alternatively, companies, and this is let's say in particular like a venture capital fund, maybe an early stage startup where they're about to enter their next stage of growth, they might say, we're very conscious of the fact that we are all white people from the same class, the same background, really, really similar identities, and we don't actually know very much about bias and discrimination and structural oppression, and we want to build an equitable organization. So can you come in and talk to us about that and teach us about that? And then what will often happen off the back of someone who's hired us to come in and do training about inclusion and diversity and belonging is after that workshop, they'll suddenly realize, okay, wow, we're doing a lot of things wrong here, or we're doing a lot of things that don't align with the research on how to be diverse and inclusive. And that's when we might engage with them on a consulting level and actually go in, you know, an hour a week or a day a month or whatever, sit with the product team, sit with the HR team, et cetera, and just check it for those red flags that research has identified will put off Black people from applying for a job or put women off using your product. So yeah, that's the scope of how that works.
And what are some of those red flags?
So some of those red flags, like I guess one that's really easy to start with is just thinking of like copy and wordings. You know, there's some really fun tools out there like Textio now that can do that for you, where they can scan a job add description and pull out phrases that have been shown to put off underrepresented people from applying. But sometimes it's not just the types of the words you use, it's also the information that you include or don't include. Like if you're leaving off the salary range, all of the research shows that underrepresented people are less likely to apply because we don't have the luxury of not maximizing our income. We're all out here trying to maximize our income because we have dependents. We're trying to create multi-generational wealth. We got previous generations that we still need to pay back. So having salary information is crucial. And also, even sometimes going back to thinking about your company values. Like a lot of people have company values that are modeled on old companies or just really outdated and don't speak to what professionals, especially young professionals, want right now. So then it's a case of, do your values reflect the interests of your target audience? And if that target audience is Black and brown women and men, whatever the case might be, it's like, how are you showing that you care about these communities? How are you showing that you put your money where your mouth is when it comes to supporting these communities? And that would be like another red flag. Like if you aren't actively doing anything to invest in the communities that have literally been created to help you make your company more diverse and inclusive, what are you doing? So it might be like, oh, at the moment when we have an open job, we just post it on Twitter and then like tag some Black communities we know. And it's like, okay, do you buy an ad on their job board? And they're like, oh, well, we don't really work with recruiters. And I'm like, well, they're not recruiters, they're communities. So, it's even just trying to educate them on how communities work and what are the best ways to work with communities. I'm actually working on a project like that right now with one of the biggest media companies in the world because they don't have a strategy for connecting with communities. They're like, we're going to be the community because we're one of the largest media companies in the world. And I was like, no, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. Like, it's not always build it, they will come, especially when it comes to where do underrepresented people go for trusted information. And where we go for trusted information is communities built by us for us.
Say that again.
I said, you know what I mean? Where we go for trusted information is communities built by us for us. So don't tell me, big old media company, tech company, oh, we're going to build a community, because it's not going to be as engaged or as authentic as one that's built by the people you're trying to get. I'm
glad you said that, because I've been dealing with this very same thing for a number of years when it comes to BIT. And a huge tech company, I've had to tell them this a number of times, like what they want to do. And this goes back to, this goes back to what you said about for us, by us, right? Like the reason why our communities work is because our communities trust us.
Exactly.
And if you're trying to circumvent that trust, it's not going to turn out great for you. So I tell a lot of these companies, like, instead of trying to do this thing on your own, why don't you fall back and invest or help sponsor or whatever organizations, grassroots organizations like ours that have the ear of our community, so that we can deliver that message. So it's okay if, for instance, you say, we're doing this event and it's powered by such and such companies. Like Blacks in Technology presents this event powered by. That's okay that you're in the background. Let's just say that that place is Amazon. So if it's powered by Amazon, that's fine. What is not going to work is if you step out in front and as if to think that you're going to somehow grab the attention of the Black community when you dismiss them for so long. And that's what ends up happening. Like these companies, they come in and they want to do an event and they want to label it a diversity and inclusion event. But what they want from us is just promotion.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, can you just promote this with your networks? No, we can't.
Exactly. I mean, I say this all the time, where I'm just like, you do realize slavery is over and free labor ain't a thing anymore. Because the number of times I've been asked to do free work, I'm like, would you do it for free? Okay, then why should I?
Yeah, and that leads me to what you spoke about on how some of these companies will say, "Oh, I'll just tag them on Twitter." I don't know how many times companies have done that, and just, hey, we're hiring for this. Can you tweet this out to you? No, I cannot. This took hard work to build this up, to build this network, to build this community, to gain their trust, and you just expect me to just tweet your stuff out? Like, you're not going to support us in any type of way? You just want me to just tweet your stuff out?
It's so
like,
frustrating.
That's not the way to go about it.
I always tell people,
right.
I say this to my team, if someone's like, can you share this? Can you do that? I was like, send them the link for posting a job in our newsletter and our social media. You just keep sending that link every time they ask you. Every time they ask you. It's like, you want us to do it? You pay the price. You don't pay the price, we don't do it. That's it. I mean, the only people I will happily do that for is other underrepresented communities. If you're another underrepresented community founded by another underrepresented person like myself, of course, because we are on the same page, we are on the same mission. But this is a really interesting thing where I see this happen in tech all the time, and I see this happen with diversity entrepreneurs like ourselves all the time. Privilege is such an interesting thing because it is such a blocker to understanding. What typically happens with the big tech companies is you have people from the dominant group. So you'll have, let's say, straight, white, wealthy, relatively wealthy, individuals who are now in charge of a diversity project. So everything they know about feeling excluded, being an underrepresented person really is just theoretical, right? And maybe something they've only just started reading about in the last X months or years or whatever, since they've taken on this role. And they are people who are in a privileged enough position to take things at face value and know that when they go to an industry event or an online event or whatever it is, they're very unlikely to feel excluded because that is just not the default for them, right? The default for them is to be in that dominant group, be somewhere, fit in, I can take information at face value, and that's cool, that's all right, that's whatever. Like all of the things that we might be dealing with, from microaggressions to the racial pay gap to all of these crazy things that impact us in the long term in a really negative way, they're so completely oblivious to. So when it then comes down to this idea of sharing information from a trusted source to people that come to that source specifically because of the challenges they face and they need that trust, they don't understand the value of that. They don't understand the value of that because they don't need that. They don't need that. And that's the challenge that we as diversity entrepreneurs have. Before we even start our company, we have decades and decades and decades of raw data and experience, right? So by the time we actually launch our product or service and people are like, oh, what user research did you do? Blah, blah, blah. You're like, you're looking at it, okay? Like, this is my life. And then we have individuals who come from different backgrounds because that is why we do the work we do, right? Like we're in a minority group here. They then come and start interacting with our products and start interacting with our services, and they have not taken the time to understand the problem. They just want to get their solution, get their goal. They've got their target. They're coming at us like it's just another KPI, and it's so much more complex than that. I always say it's that problem is never going to go away for us. It's never going to go away for us because we're still, unfortunately, we're scraping the surface, really, of getting folks to understand the complexities and challenges of being a Black person at work.
What's up, everyone? We hope that you're enjoying this episode of the Blacks in Technology BITTechTalk podcast. Do you or someone you know have a dope story that they want to share with our BIT audience? Blacks in Technology is seeking guests to be on our podcast. We're looking to highlight the journeys and experiences of Black women and men in the tech industry. So if you know of someone, send them our way. Shoot us an email to contact us at blacksintechnology.net or click on the link in the show notes and fill out our form. We're looking to hear from you. I want to touch on something that you mentioned too around employers putting the salary on the job description and how that can deter underrepresented people from even applying. I want to tell a quick story about there's an NBA player, and this might add a little bit of clarity to that whole thing as to why. There's this NBA player. His name is Kyle Korver. He played for at the time the Cleveland Cavaliers. He's a white guy. And he was having a conversation with one of his teammates. I can't remember the teammate's name. But they were just talking, and the black teammate was talking about what his salary is, what he does with his salary. And I think one of the things was around taking care of a bunch of family members. And Cal
Mm.
Corver was just like, "What the heck? What do you mean? You take care of your mom and dad? Like what is that about?" And he penned this op-ed that was just brilliant,
Mm.
where he was like, "I had no idea that that's what a lot of black players, NBA players do. They
Wow.
take care of their family because they don't benefit from the privilege and the all the other things that I get to benefit from as a white male in this country. I don't
Mm.
have to take care of my parents because my parents are already pretty well off." And I mention that because you mentioned something about salary and creating generational wealth, but and a lot of times, and I've talked to people within the big community, we end up having to take care of family members, and maybe not fully take care of them, but look out for them quite a bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
um, and so we don't have that, we don't really have that option of going into something blind and not knowing how much you're going to get paid. Like, we need to know.
Absolutely.
And so if people want to, you know, they want to look at it and say, why do you need to know this? So, hey, because these are some of the things and the reality of what we have to deal with as black and brown people in this world. And these are things that you probably don't have to even worry about, that we do.
Exactly. When a black or brown person is making a career decision, that isn't, most of the time, as you said, a decision that is only affecting them. It's their entire support network, entire community, even that could be reliant on
Yep.
that individual. And yeah, that's something that most hiring managers probably don't understand.
Yeah. So, what are some of the metrics that you use to kind of show that a company is making some progress? Like, after you've come in, you do your training and things
Yeah.
like that. I'm pretty sure there's follow up. What are those metrics and what do they look like?
So a lot of the times when I work with companies, I actually challenge them to define this, what their success metric, or with regards to diversity and inclusion, looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because I just found that diversity and inclusion, ultimately, it's about understanding identities, understanding people with different identities, understanding the different ways structures of society impact our identities, and all the different types of obstacles and challenges we will uniquely face as we are trying to build up our careers and be successful at work. And because identity is so complex and so much of it is just socially constructed and ultimately just kind of like made up by history and the stories that we hear and the experiences that we've had, all this kind of stuff, it wasn't helpful for me to come into a B2B relationship with an expectation of what their ideal situation should be. Because every time I would
Mm-hmm.
meet a stakeholder from a company, whether that's a pre-seed, early stage company, or like a public, big multinational tech company, I just realized that there's so many different levels of, like, one, comprehension of social justice, identity, all that sort of thing. Two, different levels of um, even just comprehension of like how far they want to go on that front. For some people, like, it's like, oh, we just want to do more for the people from underrepresented backgrounds in our organization already. For some people, it was, we want to bring more underrepresented people into our organization. And even those
Right.
two challenges, if you actually break them up, constitute so many different pieces, right? Let's say specifically there are a lot of underrepresented people in our organization, and we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to help them succeed. And it's like, okay, well, like, where do we start, right? So what's already being done to help them succeed? Like, are there any employee resource groups available for them? Like, how transparent are you about how you make decisions as a company and about how you make decisions around promotions and compensation?
Mm.
And then it's like,
Right.
what about everyone else in the company that they are interacting with? Like, do you feel confident that everyone in this organization is on the same level of understanding when it comes to how to be empathetic, how to support people from underrepresented or communities. Like, so it's like so many pieces of the puzzle to say I want to be a diverse and inclusive organization is basically like there's no template for what that looks like. You as an organization have to decide, you know, based on where you are now and like how big you are and all the different things that are going on, what being more diverse and inclusive looks like for you. So the metric that I always say to my employees, to my clients is just for this first wave of work, right? Because I see the journey of diversity and inclusion actually as being a constantly ongoing thing. It's not an absolute. You don't get from 0 to 100. It's going to shift. It's going to change. Identity is becoming more nuanced. We're facing more challenges every day. So I always say to them, think of where you are now. Think of some of the most awkward, difficult, really tough pain points. Like for many of my clients, especially here in the UK, because dialogue around race, it's not as advanced as in the US. Okay. Like we, you know, America had that Black Power movement and really like pushed dialogue around, you know, let's call ourselves Black and let's talk about being Black into the mainstream. Whereas here in the UK, you know, we're still using acronyms like Black and minority ethnic. You know, people feel more comfortable using the acronym BAME than saying Black and brown. So for many of my clients, the challenge that they have right now is that they can't even talk about race or talk about sexism or talk about things like white supremacy and how white supremacy as a system of oppression impacts the education system. And therefore, if they're only recruiting from a certain number of universities, will forever impact their ability to source other identities. So for a lot of them, they haven't even like, you know, understood that piece of the puzzle yet. So success for them might look like right now, we can't even bring up race when we talk about recruitment because it makes everyone feel really awkward. They're worried they're going to say the wrong thing. So we just want to get to a point in this first phase of diversity and inclusion work where we can get comfortable talking about these important issues. And then maybe the second phase of that work will be like, okay, now we're ready to start measuring stuff. So let's think about designing a survey, getting a baseline, seeing how comfortable people are, you know, feeling included, talking about inclusion, talking about their identities. And then maybe the next phase will be, okay, now success and diversity and inclusion looks like everyone in the company being trained on bias and discrimination. So at least we can be on the same page when we start saying things like, how can we be more inclusive in an intersectional way or whatever that might look like. You know, they want to make sure everyone in the company has a firm understanding of what it means to be racist, and that, yes, discriminating against someone because you don't agree with their culture or they're this or they're that, yes, that is racist. So know that, you know? So yeah, I don't have set metrics. It's more just an exercise in me working with them to understand what success looks like, and also making them aware of the fact that that's not the finishing line. It's more just the milestone. Like, let's set a milestone for the next 6 or 12 months, and then we set another milestone on after that.
No, I think that's an excellent approach. Especially how you mentioned, you know, people. That kind of shocked me to hear that people are not even comfortable with even talking about, and maybe that's just a cultural difference between the United States and the UK. Is that you're right in that there's a much more. And we still have a long ways to go, but there has been those movements, and there's movements now that exist, and it gives you a little bit more confidence in yourself as a Black person to talk about these things in a certain manner, because I think white people here are at least a little bit more cognizant that these movements are around and that they exist. And so it makes the discussion probably a little bit more easier to kind of approach. So I was shocked to hear that like like those types of things are kind of a starting point for when you enter into a company. So very interesting.
Absolutely. And, you know, there have been a lot of civil rights movements here in the UK. But what I'm trying to say is specifically in terms of like general conversation and general discourse, specifically in the workplace, in the corporate workplace, like we are still not there. And I think one of the reasons behind that is if you look at the startup landscape in the UK, so specifically in London, just because of the things that we've kind of already touched on and we already explained, entrepreneurship is a very, very risky endeavor, tech entrepreneurship in particular, and it is easier to get into this game if you have capital available to you easily. And that means that a lot of people who have capital available to them easily come from very privileged groups. So that is specifically upper middle class people that probably went to private school and then probably went to one of the most prestigious universities and then probably got into tech. So what you have for the most part in tech is a really, really privileged group of people that haven't really, by virtue of their privilege, spent time with people who are not like them. So now they're like in their 20s or their 30s. And like, I mean, you could challenge them to count how many people they know from a different class or a different race. This is actually one of the activities that I do. And, a lot of the time, it's not many. It's really not many. There's a really great exercise, and it's called the Trusted 10. And, anyone who's listening, maybe do this for yourself. It could be quite fun. So you write down the name of the 10 people in your life right now that you trust the most. So these might be the first person you text when something happens. Maybe they're the people that, you got your WhatsApp group set with them, whatever, family, friends, partners, etc. The 10 you trust the most. After you write them down, write down how old they are, what level of education they went up to, whether or not they're disabled, write down their ethnicity, write down their sexual orientation, and start to see a pattern. For most people, everyone on that list is going to be the same race and probably maybe the same level of education, the same class, the same background, etc. And it's only probably folks who maybe grew up in a multicultural home or like had a really multicultural life that list is a bit more diverse. But yeah, I do that exercise a lot, and a lot of the times it's the same results.
Yeah, it's funny that you mention that. I it's not the exact same same exercise, but I do that on Facebook. Like I look at people's friends list and just look at, like, wow, like you have no black friends or one, or where, you look at a lot of the black people that, and they have, a lot more, white friends than the white people who like only have a few black friends. It's just like you can see right then and there how kind of confined or sheltered or in the bubble that a lot of people are in, just based off of who they're friends with on Facebook. It's crazy. So I want to. I was checking out the Hustle Crew site, and I ran across a brief description of the imposter syndrome workshop.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you a few questions about that, mainly around imposter syndrome and your take on it, because I've been in tech for almost 17, 18 years, and there's still times where I feel it, and it always takes my wife to be like, "Hey, you're great."
Yeah.
Quit worried about it. So I wanted to, even after a person has achieved a certain level of success, like why do people still kind of experience imposter syndrome?
So I have my own take on this, which I'm going to share since you're asking. So the research shows that imposter syndrome, by definition, is this inability to internalize our achievements. That's what leads to the source of being a fraud. And actually, it's like the most ambitious people that tend to report imposter syndrome. And I can totally see why that's the case, because if you're someone that's always pushing yourself forward and always trying to make progress and make change and make things happen, you're never really satisfied, right? Because every time you reach that goal, you think of a new goal you want to hit, right? So I certainly see how like entrepreneurs in particular, and people from underrepresented backgrounds, because of the additional challenges we have to face, we're always going to be susceptible to imposter syndrome. And exactly how you're saying, your wife often has to be the person to remind you that actually you're an incredibly accomplished person working on really great things. That's the same role that my husband has to play, in my life. And, even though people will message me like, I read your book, it changed my life, it's amazing, I still have to pinch myself because it doesn't feel real. And I think, I genuinely think, and I haven't done research on this, but I genuinely think that underrepresented professionals are going to face a disproportionate amount of imposter syndrome, because the few times we have internalized our achievements and communicated about them, they haven't always been met with positivity. Now, I don't know about you, but, I shared one of my career stories earlier where I wasn't believed. I was saying things that I didn't agree with, I didn't like, and people didn't believe me. They didn't believe my interpretation of events. They didn't agree with what I said. And so the fact is, there have been times where I did not have imposter syndrome. I actually was very proud of what I had achieved. I had internalized that, and I had presented those facts on the table for my peers or my boss at the time to see, and they were ignored or they were dismissed. And I'm sure, you can see this too in a similar way. Again, people from the Black community, brown community, we see this all the time where someone from the white community that is not as talented, not as capable, is getting either the accolades or the attention, the recognition that someone from our community should rightfully be getting too, but is not.
Yeah.
So I feel that, like, while white supremacy exists in our minds and society and stuff like that, we're always going to struggle with imposter syndrome. And I have switched to this mindset of my imposter syndrome is never going away, but how do I keep it in check? And that's why community is so important for me, because without community, I can very easily fall into, what's happening on a higher level, this dismissal of our identity, this dismissal of our value. So community is so important because I can come back into my communities where I am valued, where I am respected, and then I can be reminded of who I really am. And that is someone who is great and deserving of good things. But, imposter syndrome happens to us because we are great and we're doing good things. And then people tell us it's not good enough.
Yeah. It's I've experienced what you just mentioned on a number of different levels in my career. When I first started out in tech, I worked at this company as a computer retail store called Micro Center, and it's just a place where you go and you all things tech there. Like if you want to build your a PC or something like that, then they have parts. If you want a specific software, want to buy a Mac, want to buy a full computer, like all that is at this retail store. And I worked in this department called accessories. And one of the things that used to happen to me quite a bit would be I would have someone who was white would approach me about something. And I would tell them the answer about it, like, hey, I'm trying to do this with this part, and I'd say, hey, you need this adapter, right? And they would literally look at me, say, okay, and then turn around and walk right over to a white associate and ask them the very same question.
Wow.
Like right in my face.
That's so fucked up.
And so one of the things I started doing was whenever they would do that, I would go and stand right by the other associate so they could see that I knew that they were doing that, and I would hear the same response from that associate. The other thing that would happen to me would be at a company that I worked for, would be one of our sales associate would ask me about a specific solution, tech solution, and I would give them an answer to their question, and they would turn right around to our CTO who would sit right next to me and ask them the very same question.
Wow.
But I would check them at that point. I was like, hey, I just answered you. I just told you what it was. Why would you turn around and ask him the same thing? Now, fortunately for me, I work at a company now that is that I have some brilliant teammates, and so I haven't felt once that any type of I haven't experienced any type of behavior. Everyone is always super supportive of everyone's achievements and work that they do and things like that. So I've been fortunate in the current position that I'm in, but I've experienced that on a number of levels throughout my career. And it's kind of daunting, but I learned how to deal with it.
Yes.
To some extent.
Yeah, exactly. But, at the same time, we are social creatures, and, our brains have evolved somewhat, recently. But at the same time, there are still the brains that we've kind of had for hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of years. And so we don't always give enough credit to the impact of all of those interactions that we've absorbed over our lifetime. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I have to be kind to myself. I'm like, why aren't I more confident in myself? You know, why am I having this self-doubt? Why am I having this imposter syndrome? And it's because of situations exactly like the one you've just described. And if you now really did an audit on your life and counted how many times someone doubted you just as a result of your identity, it would actually be too painful a number probably to even, you know, sum up and share. And so, you know, we have to be kind to ourselves, I think. We really have to, because as I said, you know, it's not going to go anywhere because it's still engraved in our brain somewhere. You can't make that go away, but it's about learning to manage it and keep it in check.
I agree. What's something about imposter syndrome that you didn't know until, you know, you kind of did the research and organized the workshop?
Yeah, so one of the things that I didn't know, it's Dr. Valerie Young that coined this phrase while she was in her academic career researching, you know, psychology of confidence and accomplishment of women and men in the workplace. She was inspired by this study that showed that, you know, women in work had real feelings of being a fraud. And what was surprising to me when I actually started going into this research and understanding more about what Dr. Valerie Young had found out was she could actually describe certain ways that imposter syndrome manifests itself. So there's actually different ways that your feelings of being a fraud will play out in how you behave at work. And one of them is called the perfectionist. And the perfectionist type of imposter syndrome is this idea that everything has to be perfect, but only you know how to make it perfect. So you do everything yourself. You just, you know, you really don't delegate. You don't even share or show anything until you think it's done. And the ironic thing about that is when you actually leave people out of the process of creating, you're holding yourself back because you're holding yourself back from ideas, from feedback. And that was really helpful for me to learn because I realized that that was my type of imposter syndrome, that I was a perfectionist and that being a perfectionist was actually holding me back from creating better work and from being a better team player. Because in my head, I'm like, let me make this perfect before I show people. But in their head, they're like, why hasn't she shown us anything yet? I have ideas. I want to help. So it was really helpful to learn about that type of imposter syndrome.
Very nice. I have to check that out. You say that's a book?
Yeah. So actually, you can go on her website, Dr. Valerie Young. Okay. If you Google imposter syndrome, I'm pretty sure she'll be one of the first hits. And there's the perfectionist type of imposter syndrome, but there's so many others. There's also the superhuman. So that's someone that feels so inferior that they feel they have to work all the time and hopefully not get caught. So there'll be people that like are working in secret. You don't even know they're putting in the hours on the weekend because they feel like for them to work at your level, they have to work more than you. There's also the soloist. That's someone that feels that they have to do everything on their own because if they ask for help, asking for help shows them as weak, shows them as being a fraud. There's also the natural genius. So a lot of us that were really good at things when we were in school picked things up really easily when we were in school, have this expectation that we should still pick things up easily now. But anyone knows you're not going to pick up React.js easily, are you? You're not going to like pick up like pitching a deal really easily. Like so many things in a complex environment take time and take practice. So people that don't pick things up easily and then start to doubt themselves very heavily are more of that natural genius type of imposter syndrome. But yeah, it's worth anyone doing that research because once you can name those psychological barriers, you suddenly get power over them, right? So that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, I definitely have to check that out. I'll put the link to whatever I found out in the show notes. Thank you. So let's switch gears and start talking about the Techish podcast. Tell us what the Techish podcast is and why you decided to do it.
Yeah, so Techish is a show that drops every week. Myself and Michael, so similar to us, diversity entrepreneur, community builder. He runs People of Color in Tech. It was about 2 years ago, and the two of us, you know, we're both solo founders, we're both bootstrapping, we're both working in diversity in tech. So, you know, we are peers and we mentor each other, we help each other. So we, you know, spend a lot of time just kind of messaging each other back and forth. You know, I'll be working at my house, he'll be working at his house. And we like to share podcasts with each other and share interesting articles about entrepreneurship, startups, and tech. And we were just talking once and we were just like, all the podcasts we share are literally Silicon Valley guys talking about Silicon Valley deals and Silicon Valley startups and who just closed however many millions in a round. And I was just like, this is kind of weird, right? Because we're also tech entrepreneurs, but we're not even getting venture funding and we have no interest in doing it. And also, like, how are all of these companies that are working on sometimes BS problems getting all of this money? Meanwhile, like real problems in our community, like the fact that autonomous vehicles have been reported to not recognize dark skin, aren't getting solved. We were like, something's happening here. So we just had this idea. It was an experiment. We're like, let's record a podcast. We're going to cover the latest tech news, but we're going to do it from our lens, right? And, we just happen to be two Black millennials. So, who also are tech founders, but who are bootstrapping. So what happens when we review the news? What stories matter to us and what do we care about? And we released that first episode. I laugh when I listen to it now. It was like an hour and 15 minutes long. We just kind of were freestyling. And we shared it online, and we just wanted to see if people liked it, if people were interested. And the response was incredible. Like, so many people, especially Black folks in tech and brown folks in tech and, Black and brown women, men in tech, just connected with it. They loved the conversation. And also people who aren't in tech but interested in tech loved how uncomplicated it was. They were just like, you guys, it's like I'm sitting with my friends in a coffee shop. I really get what you're saying. And now tech isn't as scary to me or as unapproachable to me. And, fast forward 2 years later, we have built this global community. You can use hashtag Techish on Twitter and see folks who are listening from South Africa to Kenya to Nigeria. It's really connected with Black techies everywhere. But not just Black techies. We did our first live event in London, 100 tickets, sold out show. And we had Black and brown folks, a lot of folks from like Muslim community, Asian community. People who don't feel represented by the dominant voices in tech have felt very represented by Techish. And I'm so glad, because that's why we did it, right? We were listening to the mainstream tech podcast and we were like, nah, like it's missing something. So we were like, let's put some spice in this, And we're so grateful for everyone who's listened. We've stayed in the top 20 tech podcasts on Apple Podcasts, for quite some months now. And yeah, it's a great thing. And also it's so cool how many more Black tech, brown tech, or other underrepresented tech podcasts are coming out. Because I think it just shows that, we are increasing our representation in this industry, thankfully, standing on the shoulders of giants like yourself. And I hope that if this continues to grow and keeps continuing to expand, our mission of increasing representation in tech can just happen a lot quicker. That's what I hope.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I feel the same way. And I was just about to mention that it's so funny when I started doing our podcast some years ago, there were probably only a handful of that I knew of at the time, and like you mentioned, I mean, it was one of the reasons why I wanted to do it, because our representation, not just in tech, but just in the media representation of black women and men in tech was pretty much non-existent, right? If you opened up any tech any tech magazine or publication or look online or anything like that, you didn't see us there. And I'm not the type to I'm not going to go bang on so and so's door, for instance.
Yes.
To say, hey, you need to have us. I'm like, hey, the internet is the biggest media outlet there is. We can do this on our own. So if I can start something like this, and you can start something like this, and others can start something like this, we take that into our own hands, right? And we take our destiny into our own hands, and that way we can dictate how we're being represented, and the type of things and what we want to represent, and not leave that up to anyone else to do for us. So
Absolutely.
that was my approach to my mindset, I should say, and to wanting to start a podcast. I thought the visibility, even though this is a podcast you're listening, but I thought that was an important aspect of diversity and inclusion, and increasing our representation in tech. So I applaud you. I applaud everyone else out there who has started podcasts and are now adding to this huge list of Black founded podcasts. Like it's a huge thing, and I'm glad that it's happened.
Yes, agreed, totally. Let's have more.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it's important
Definitely.
for us to have more because, going back to something that we've covered a lot, when we think about diversity, inclusion, belonging, identity, social justice, all of these things, like there's a lot of information to unpack, and it's really complex, and it's important for people to connect with voices that they are receptive to. And because we're all
Yes.
unique individuals, what I am most receptive to isn't necessarily what you will be most receptive to or what my husband will be most receptive to. We're all different. And that's why it's
Yeah.
actually so important for me that within the diversity and inclusion space, there are as many voices as possible participating in it. Because the more voices that are participating, the more opportunities for individuals to connect with a voice that they are receptive to. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
we
definitely.
need as many of us out here doing it in our own different unique ways, because the more we're exposed to all of these unique approaches and unique attempts, the more information and education is out there to help us share this information, and move the
Yeah.
agenda forward.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about your book.
Yeah.
Tell us, your book, Dream Big, Hustle Hard,
Hmm.
The Millennial Woman's Guide to Success in Tech. Tell us about, what made you, tell us what it's about, and then what made you decide to write it.
It's funny because you literally just said when you started this podcast many years ago, there were so few Black podcasts, and I can imagine hardly any
Yeah.
Black tech podcasts probably. But
Yeah.
similar thing where I just thought, where is the book that teaches young people how to get a job in a startup? And in particular, how to get this job if you don't have the connections and the network and the access that most people that get into startups do. Most people that get into startups went to one of the universities where startup founders have already gone, or someone in their parents' network or whoever's network is already in tech, and they just get a leg up, like, oh, here you go. So I just kind of thought it's kind of messed up to me that this industry that is, growing off the back of us, our communities, our people, and we're relying on it, we're not participating in it. I was just like, we need more of us participating in it. This is crazy. So that's why I wrote my book. I was just like, well, I have worked in tech. I know how to get into startups, and I'm good at writing. So why don't I write a playbook that teaches young people from any background? You don't even need to know how to code, because I only started learning how to code in my late 20s. I'd already been working in tech 6-7 years. That teaches them how to get in. And I wanted to write a book particularly from a women's perspective for women, because I do think we navigate the job market slightly differently. There's just different expectations of women as a result of living in patriarchy. So that's why I wrote the book. And it was actually so fortunate that I'd already been, running the Hustle Crew community for some time. By the time I wrote the book, I'd already done a few meetups. I'd already started coaching and mentoring people, because I realized there were a lot of common challenges that young women were facing, whether it's, I don't even know what jobs to apply for, or I don't know how to negotiate my offers, or every time I get rejected, I'm so demotivated, I don't even want to apply again. So how do we deal with rejection? And so it was really easy for me to determine what the chapters of the book would be, because I could just go through my notes of all these conversations I'd had with the community and pick out the most common themes. And that's basically why I wrote the book, not only to create this playbook to help young people break into startups, particularly young people from, Black and brown communities, but also because I just realized, well, I keep having really similar conversations with my community members and mentees. So, being a techie, being a startup pro, I was like, how do I build a scalable solution for this? And the scalable solution to, multiple individuals having the same problems is to build a book, right? Because then when you have the book, you don't need to have the conversation over and over again. You can just share your Amazon link.
Nice. And speaking of Amazon link, go ahead and tell people, how they can. It obviously, is on Amazon.
Yes.
Is it on any other platforms besides that?
I used Amazon Direct Publishing, which I highly recommend for folks listening that want to write a book. It was just very easy for me because there's no upfront costs at all. I explored going down the publisher route. But yeah, Amazon direct publishing also means it's only available from Amazon. But if you go on Amazon and
Okay.
type in Abadesi, you can buy a paperback or Kindle edition. Amazon direct publishing, it's like print on demand. So, I literally uploaded a PDF file
Nice.
and a cover, and then it was on sale within 48 hours. It's amazing, honestly. Like, I know Amazon is a
Very
complex company, but their publishing platform has actually done a lot for underrepresented founders, because it's really hard for us to get book deals. And yeah, it's, very reasonably priced. It's like, less than less than £5 in the UK. So I guess it's like $6-7 over there. But each chapter solves a specific problem. So this is perfect for anyone in your life who's maybe still in high school or still in university, or still in their early 20s. So kind of like at the beginnings of their career, because the first few chapters are all focused on how to use our self-awareness to understand what skills we're good at and what we'll enjoy at work, and then apply that to the actual job descriptions we see out in the world. There's a whole chapter on how to adapt and tailor your resume to suit different jobs so it stands out to employers. There's a chapter on how to prepare for interviews, how to negotiate, how to find a mentor. There's a chapter on coffee date etiquette, because one of the most challenging things about working in startups is you're being interviewed even when you don't think you're being interviewed. Founder asks you out for coffee, and before you know it, it's an interview. So yeah, there's chapters on that. There's also chapters about how to carve out your own path. I reflected a lot on how I grew up in a really strict, really religious household. My parents were very dictatorial in terms of what I should do with my life. So,
Right.
I had to go through my own struggle on a personal level to find the confidence to push back on my family and say, actually, you know what, I'm not going to be a doctor or a lawyer. I want to work in tech. So hopefully people will be able to empathize with that as well, and gain some useful advice from what worked with me. My parents haven't forsaken me. They're okay with me working in tech now. But yeah, each chapter is anecdotes as well as activities and frameworks, so you can reinforce what you've learned and put it into practice.
Very nice. And to our bit audience, go out there and definitely get you a copy. I know I will be.
Thank you.
Even though I'm not a millennial and I'm not a woman, I'm still going to get a copy,
Yay!
a few copies. I can hand them out, if anything else. So excellent. So, tell us what's next for you.
So I love this question, because sometimes what's next is doing more of what I'm doing right now. And I think that's definitely how I'm feeling right now with regards to that question. I think I want to keep growing the Hustle Crew community. I create a lot of content aimed at young professionals to just support them, making sure they're entering the industry at the maximum salary they can negotiate, with the best support network to make sure they stay in the industry and keep leveling up. So I want to keep creating more content for Hustle Crew. I want to keep growing the community. I want to keep working with more clients that want to understand bias and discrimination better, and, build cultures of belonging in their companies. It's a difficult time, 2020. Budgets are being cut everywhere. And unfortunately, the work that we do is often the least prioritized in organizations. But I'm trying to stay positive. I've still got a few great companies that, it's business as usual on the diversity front from them, which is really admirable. And then, keep working on Techish, keep growing the Techish community, keep challenging the narratives in tech, because that's a big part of what we're trying to do in Techish. We're trying to cut through the hype. The tech media, for the most part, want to bring your attention to the people that have raised the most amount of money, or what big tech is doing again. And, sometimes that's distracting us from a far more urgent and important conversation around where should money in tech be going, and what should big tech be doing to support us as individuals in our communities. So yeah, I just want to use the platform I have to draw attention to the matters that I feel deserve it and deserve more attention. And I hope I can continue building the platform I've made, keep growing my following and bring more attention to the work that I do.
Excellent. And was it you who responded on Twitter with the names of a bunch of other individuals, or was that someone else? I know there was. I just want to say thank you to whoever.
Oh, okay. I think it was me, but
so there was an individual. I think that it was after we dropped our last podcast, and someone who had mentioned your name, and I think like 4 or 5 other individuals, and I want to say they're all out of the UK.
Oh, cool.
and they were like, "Hey, these are some of the people that you need to have on your show." And I was just like, "Oh, okay." And so I started reaching out to each person on Twitter. It was DM, and some of the people, for some reason, their DMs were blocked, or maybe it was because they didn't follow Bit. I don't
Yeah,
know,
so
but
some people turn off DMs on Twitter because you get a lot of random stuff in DMs. As someone that still has DMs open, I understand why some people close them.
okay, gotcha. Yeah, but I definitely reached out to some people, which is how I was able to get you on the podcast. So I want to say thank you to whoever that was,
Amazing.
and definitely want to say thank you to you, Abadesi, for joining us on the show. And before we leave, tell people how they can get in contact with you, how they can follow you, and all the URLs, all that stuff.
Oh, yes. Thank you. So, yeah, Greg, thank you. Thank you for all the great work you've done building this community, creating this podcast, bringing me on the show. I'm really grateful. And folks who are listening, if you found what I said interesting, I'd love to connect with you. I'm on LinkedIn, Abadesi. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Medium. I'm basically Abadesi on all of those URLs because my dad made up my name and I'm the only one. So I can always get my first name on most platforms. And please do check out Hustle Crew as well. We are a community for underrepresented folks in tech, and we share a lot of content around navigating a workplace that isn't level and fair, and also best practices for building cultures of belonging in the workplace. So if that sounds like stuff you want to know more about, check out Hustle Crew Live on Twitter, Instagram, or go on hustlecrew.co and sign up to our newsletter there.
And I want to add to that, subscribe to the Techish podcast,
yes!
and go buy your copy of Dream Big, Hustle Hard. I definitely want to say thank you again. This was a great conversation. I think the Bit audience would definitely love it. And I want to say, wish you much success in any of your future endeavors. And I'll be in contact with you definitely to follow up and see how things are going. Wonderful. And so let's stay in contact.
Absolutely, yes, I'd love to. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. Take care.
Blacks in technology.
Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology. Blacks in technology.